January 1945. The sky above northern Germany hangs low and gray, heavy with snow and winter fog. Smoke curls faintly from shattered chimneys, the remnants of bombed-out towns scattered across the landscape. Villages once alive with the laughter of children now echo only with the shuffling footsteps of women carrying thin bundles of firewood. Hunger is etched into every face. Mothers wrap their children in tattered blankets, praying silently that today the ration line will not run dry. In the distance, the faint hum of aircraft grows steadily louder. The women glance upward, squinting through the cold, unsure of what is coming. Their minds have been trained to fear the skies. For years, bombs have fallen from them, leaving nothing but death and ruin. Yet today, something is different. Below, the frozen fields stretch endlessly. Hunger has hollowed out the village stores, leaving empty shelves and aching bellies. And now, from the heavens, bundles of food begin to descend, parachutes blooming like pale flowers in the gray winter air. Tears stream down the faces of mothers, their hearts caught between disbelief and relief. Hope, fragile but undeniable, has arrived. The war may still rage around them, but for these women, this moment will be remembered forever. By the winter of 1944, Germany was a nation in collapse. The relentless Allied bombing campaigns had reduced entire cities to rubble, destroying factories, railways, and warehouses. Transportation networks were shattered, leaving food, coal, and medical supplies stranded far from the people who needed them most. Across the country, civilians faced a harsh, unforgiving reality: hunger. In the industrial Ruhr Valley, once teeming with life and industry, smoke rose from ruins rather than factories. Streets that had carried workers and children now carried only the shuffle of the starving. Rationing, which had been in place for years, could no longer sustain the population. By late 1944, the average daily caloric intake for civilians in many areas had dropped to dangerously low levels, sometimes below 1,000 calories per day. Potatoes, turnips, and sparse grains replaced meat, butter, and sugar, long absent from German tables. Winter deepened the suffering. Snow blanketed fields that might have yielded crops. Coal for heating was scarce, forcing families to burn furniture or clothing just to stay alive. Children suffered the most visibly. Thin, pale, and listless, they were reminders of the slow toll war had taken beyond the front lines. Rural villages were not spared. Even in small towns far from the strategic bombing of Berlin, Hamburg, or Dresden, the war's reach was felt. Farmers struggled to maintain livestock under constant fuel shortages. Livestock was requisitioned by the military, leaving barns empty and food scarce. Wells froze, water became difficult to access, and families relied on snow and frozen streams. Hunger was not only a physical pain, but a psychological burden. Families huddled in drafty homes, sharing what little they had, while winter winds whispered through broken windows. The German government, increasingly overwhelmed, attempted to maintain control through propaganda, claiming that victory was still possible and that the hardships were temporary. Newspapers published recipes for nutrient-efficient meals and advised citizens to forage for wild roots and acorns. Yet these efforts did little to ease suffering. Civilians saw the devastation around them: bridges destroyed, factories silenced, neighbors starving. Hope was growing thin, replaced by the quiet, persistent fear of death by cold or hunger. Even with the Allies advancing from both east and west, the front lines had yet to reach many villages. The civilians trapped in these frozen landscapes endured weeks of dwindling supplies, sometimes going without food for days. In reports later filed by the Red Cross and Allied observers, some villages were described as ghostly, with residents too weak to leave their homes, their existence reduced to the daily struggle for survival. Starvation was no longer a distant threat. It was the grim reality of every household. Amid this suffering, the women of Germany bore a particularly heavy burden. Mothers and grandmothers scavenged for anything edible, foraging in abandoned fields or melting snow for water. They cooked what little remained with ingenuity, rationing meager portions between children and the elderly. The strain of watching families deteriorate before their eyes created an emotional weight that rivaled the physical hunger pressing in on every side. Letters and diaries from the period describe women weeping quietly in corners, their grief a silent acknowledgement of helplessness in a world unraveling. These conditions were not unique to one town or region. Across Lower Saxony, Bavaria, and the Rhineland, the story repeated itself. A nation starving, isolated, and battered by the unrelenting pressures of total war. Food convoys from within Germany were nearly impossible to organize due to destroyed infrastructure and Allied air superiority. Even the German military, struggling to feed soldiers on multiple fronts, had little to spare for civilians. The winter of 1944-45 was proving to be one of the most brutal periods in modern European history. As starvation gripped the countryside, rumors began to spread of an unlikely intervention. The Allies were planning humanitarian food drops to relieve the suffering of the civilian population. For years, the skies have been feared as carriers of death. But now, for the first time, there is the possibility that the same skies could bring life. The anticipation of such a relief would soon collide with the reality of winter-starved villages and tear-streaked faces. This growing anticipation among civilians would become the precursor to one of the most remarkable humanitarian operations of the Second World War. An operation that would force German authorities to confront the consequences of the war's devastation and leave women weeping with disbelief and relief as bundles of food descended from the sky. By late 1944, the Allied leadership had become increasingly aware of the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Western Germany. Reports from the Red Cross, resistance networks, and aerial reconnaissance painted a stark picture. Civilians were starving, infrastructure was destroyed, and winter was claiming lives as surely as the front lines. While the primary focus of the Allies remained the defeat of Nazi Germany, planners recognized that civilian relief could serve multiple purposes: save lives, reduce suffering, and demonstrate moral superiority in the eyes of a world watching the war's final chapters. Initial discussions began in November 1944 among American and British commanders. The idea was unprecedented, using air power not for destruction, but for sustenance. Logistics officers in Washington and London calculated that large-scale airdrops of food could reach isolated villages, but the challenges were immense. Aircraft would have to fly over war-torn landscapes, still contested by retreating German forces. Weather in January was unpredictable. Snowstorms, fog, and ice threatened to derail even the most meticulously planned missions. Moreover, securing German cooperation was essential to ensure that food reached civilians rather than being seized by the military or hoarded by authorities. The planning required coordination between multiple agencies. The United States Army Air Forces, USAF, would provide the aircraft and crews. The Royal Air Force, RAF, offered experience in precision night and low-level flying. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, played a critical liaison role, negotiating with German officials in Berlin and regional administrations to allow safe passage for food deliveries. Supplies themselves were sourced from a mix of American surplus, captured stocks, and relief organizations in neutral countries. Each shipment was carefully weighed, packaged, and equipped with parachutes designed to minimize damage on impact. Aircraft selection was a strategic decision. C-47 Skytrans, already familiar from previous troop transport missions, were modified to carry palletized food. Crews trained for low-altitude, precise drops, often over unfamiliar terrain. Pilots studied maps of villages flattened by Allied bombings, memorizing landmarks to ensure accuracy. Timing was critical. Food needed to reach civilians before winter temperatures plummeted further or German authorities attempted to redirect supplies. Flight plans were synchronized across multiple bases to maximize coverage while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. even though the German military's capacity for resistance had diminished dramatically by early 1945. Negotiations with the German authorities were delicate. Hitler's regime was initially skeptical, seeing the operation as a propaganda tool rather than a humanitarian effort. Local administrators feared that civilians receiving food would view the Allies more favorably, undermining Nazi authority in areas already strained by military defeats. Yet the weight of reality, starvation, frostbite, and the growing international scrutiny eventually forced cooperation. Letters exchanged between the Red Cross and German regional offices reveal tense communications, agreements on designated drop zones, and assurances that aid would not be confiscated by military units. By December 1944, the operation was ready in principle, though the first flights were delayed by winter storms and the logistical complexity of assembling supplies across multiple Allied bases. In the United States, warehouses buzzed with activity as thousands of food parcels containing flour, sugar, canned meat, powdered milk, and chocolate were prepared for shipment. Engineers tested parachute rigging and drop mechanisms, ensuring that packages would land intact in snow-covered fields. Pilots conducted simulations, mapping routes that would avoid remaining pockets of German anti-aircraft resistance while reaching their intended targets with maximum precision. This meticulous preparation set the stage for a unique intersection of war, technology, and humanity. Civilians in Germany, women especially, were already enduring unimaginable suffering. The promise of food from the skies, an act both logistical and profoundly emotional, would soon reach them. In villages scattered across Lower Saxony and the Rhineland, mothers would watch the horizon for the hum of approaching aircraft, unaware that the first drops would change the course of their winter and create moments of disbelief, relief, and tears that would be remembered for decades. The groundwork laid by Allied planners, the careful negotiation with German authorities, and the technological adaptation of aircraft and supplies now converged on one inevitable outcome. The food drops were about to begin, and with them, the civilians' hope would materialize in tangible form. For the women of Germany, the winter of 1944 to 45 had been unrelenting. Mothers trudged through snow-laden streets, carrying children in threadbare coats, their hands numb and hearts heavy with worry. Every day was a struggle to stretch meager rations, a single loaf of bread divided among a family of 5, or a thin soup made from turnips and potato peelings. Hunger was constant, gnawing at stomachs and sapping energy, leaving faces pale and bodies frail. The psychological toll was equally severe. Women bore the responsibility of keeping households alive while grappling with the impossible choices of rationing scarce food, watching children waste away, and maintaining a fragile semblance of morale. The news of Allied food drops spread slowly, carried by word of mouth, rumor, and whispered reports from traveling officials. Skepticism mingled with hope. After years of bombing raids, the sky had been a harbinger of destruction. Yet the promise of life-giving supplies from the heavens sparked a cautious optimism. When the first aircraft appeared on the horizon, the hum of their engines brought a shock of disbelief. Mothers gathered children in courtyards, shielding them from the wind, their eyes scanning the clouds for parachutes. As bundles began to descend, women wept openly. Tears traced lines through soot and grime, mingling grief with relief. The sight of food, bread, sugar, powdered milk, landing gently in snow-covered fields was overwhelming. For the first time in months, hunger was met with sustenance. Children laughed between bites. Mothers held parcels to their chests, whispering prayers of gratitude. These moments, brief and fragile, embodied a human triumph over suffering. The civilian response framed the operation not merely as logistics, but as a deeply emotional event. Women became the emotional lens through which the significance of the Allied relief was measured, a reminder that, even in war, human compassion could pierce the veil of fear and despair. The success of the food drops depended on precision, coordination, and the willingness of Allied leadership to innovate under wartime conditions. From Washington to London, military planners faced a complex challenge, delivering thousands of tons of food to civilian populations scattered across winter-battered Germany, all while navigating the risks of snow, fog, and the remnants of German anti-aircraft defenses. Each flight required meticulous planning. Routes were plotted to avoid remaining pockets of resistance. Fields were surveyed from aerial reconnaissance photos, and drop zones were carefully selected to maximize coverage while minimizing potential accidents. Technological adaptations played a crucial role. The C-47 Skytran, a reliable transport aircraft, was modified for cargo drops. Palletized food was secured with parachutes designed to slow descent and prevent spoilage. Pilots trained for low-altitude flights to ensure accuracy, often flying just tens of meters above frozen fields. Navigation relied on a combination of rudimentary radio beacons, pre-printed maps, and visual landmarks, with crews prepared for sudden snow squalls or reduced visibility. Every drop carried not just food, but the weight of civilian expectation and the risk of failure. Leadership decisions reflected both strategic foresight and moral consideration. Generals and commanders in the USAF and RAF coordinated with the Red Cross to guarantee that supplies would reach civilians. Meetings in London and Washington balanced military priorities with humanitarian imperatives, acknowledging that these operations were unprecedented in scope. Orders emphasized discipline, precision, and adherence to negotiated agreements with German authorities, a recognition that any misstep could compromise both safety and the perception of the Allies' moral standing. The combination of strategy, technology, and leadership transformed the food drops from a logistical challenge into a demonstration of operational excellence. These measures ensured that when the first bundles fell from the sky, they would land where they were needed most, allowing women, children, and the elderly to witness, for the first time in months, that relief had arrived. The Nazi administration viewed the incoming Allied food drops with a mixture of suspicion, frustration, and reluctant compliance. For years, propaganda had portrayed the Allies as ruthless invaders, intent on total destruction. Now, German officials were confronted with an act that challenged that narrative, aircraft delivering sustenance to civilians instead of bombs. At local government offices, administrators debated how to respond. Allowing the drops risked undermining authority, but blocking them could provoke international condemnation and worsen civilian suffering. Military officers expressed concern that the operation could bolster civilian morale in ways unfavorable to the regime. Reports filtered upward, describing women and children receiving food, tears streaming, faces alight with hope, an image at odds with Nazi messaging of continued struggle and sacrifice. Some regional commanders attempted to redirect supplies for their own units, but oversight by the Red Cross and Allied insistence limited such interference. At the same time, there was a grudging acknowledgement of the humanitarian necessity. Starvation was rampant, and civilians were dying in increasing numbers. Orders from Berlin instructed local authorities to facilitate the drops while maintaining formal appearances of control. Internal memos reveal the tension. Officials were forced to cooperate with an enemy they had been trained to fear, creating an uneasy compromise that allowed relief to reach those who needed it most. The German perspective underscores the complexity of wartime morality and control. While women wept with relief in the villages, officials were caught between ideological loyalty, bureaucratic procedure, and the undeniable reality of civilian suffering. Their reactions, often bureaucratic and constrained, contrast sharply with the human responses in the towns below, emphasizing the stark divide between lived experience and administrative concern. These competing forces, civilian hope and governmental hesitation, set the stage for the operation's climax. The first actual drops, when the sky above German villages would fill with parachutes, and the impact of Allied relief would become viscerally real. January 7th, 1945. The dawn was gray, the landscape blanketed in snow and frost. Villages across Lower Saxony were silent, the usual sounds of daily life suppressed by months of starvation and cold. Women and children huddled inside their homes, listening to the distant wind whip across ruined streets. The air smelled of smoke, damp wood, and despair. Then came a sound that was unfamiliar and startling. The distant, steady hum of approaching aircraft engines. At first, mothers peered cautiously from windows. For years, planes had brought destruction, bombs, fire, death. Now, the same machines carried a different purpose. Slowly, the C-47 Skytrans appeared through the low-hanging clouds, flying in tight formation, their underbellies laden with carefully prepared food pallets. Pilots, aware of both the fragility of their cargo and the lives depending on it, flew with meticulous precision, descending to low altitudes to ensure accurate drops over the chosen fields. Parachutes began to bloom in the pale winter sky, their white canopies resembling flowers against the gray backdrop. Each bundle contained bread, sugar, powdered milk, and canned meat, items that would sustain families who had not eaten adequately in days, sometimes weeks. In the village of Hamelin, German women stepped out into the snow, shielding their children, eyes wide with disbelief. The first bundles touched the frozen ground with soft thuds. Mothers rushed forward, gathering parcels in their arms, tears streaming freely. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by emotion, whispering prayers of thanks. Children grabbed at sacks, their laughter breaking the heavy silence of hunger and fear. Reports from pilots later described the scenes below with awe. One crewman wrote that women wept openly, holding the parcels to their chests, as though the sky itself had delivered hope. In another village, men who had remained stoic through weeks of starvation were seen assisting their families, carrying food parcels and helping children untangle parachutes. Even livestock, hungry and neglected, were fed from surplus portions of grain. The operation was at once logistical and profoundly human, with every drop a tangible symbol of relief. The Germans in administrative positions watched uneasily. Local officials recorded the event, noting that while the deliveries were intended purely for civilian sustenance, the visual impact on the population could not be ignored. Women, traditionally the backbone of family survival, were visibly moved. They wept, clutched their children, and distributed the food among neighbors. Soldiers stationed nearby, and used to witnessing civilian relief in the middle of war, paused to observe, their faces betraying a mix of disbelief and quiet gratitude. The first day's flights set the pattern for what would follow. Each aircraft sortie became a coordinated ballet of timing, navigation, and trust. Crews practiced precise formation flying to maximize coverage, dropping bundles over multiple villages in a single run. Parachutes drifted gently in the cold morning air, guided by winds that required careful calculation. With each successful delivery, reinforcing hope in the hearts of the civilians below. The sight of women moving swiftly through snow-covered fields to retrieve supplies, children clinging to mothers, and elderly citizens kneeling in gratitude became the defining image of the operation. By evening, the first full day of food drops had concluded. Thousands of parcels had been delivered, and word of the operation spread quickly. Villagers spoke in hushed, awed tones of the miracle from the skies. Mothers recounted the sight of parachutes, children's laughter breaking the tension, and the warm food finally filling empty stomachs. Diaries from the period capture these moments vividly. Women writing of tears, relief, and the fragile rekindling of hope. In the midst of war, amidst destruction and despair, the first drops marked a turning point. Hunger had gripped entire communities for months, and now, for the first time, sustenance was tangible, immediate, and abundant. The emotional weight of the moment, particularly for women who bore the responsibility of family survival, was unmistakable. Tears, laughter, and disbelief intertwined as life-giving food descended from the gray winter sky. The initial success would pave the way for a much larger operation, expanding the reach of humanitarian aid across Western Germany. The precision, courage, and coordination displayed in these first drops set the stage for the emotional and logistical crescendo that was about to follow. By mid-January 1945, The operation had grown beyond the cautious initial flights. Hundreds of C-47 Skytrans and accompanying RAF aircraft took to the skies in coordinated waves, each carrying tons of food, chocolate, powdered milk, and other essentials. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. No previous wartime air campaign had delivered humanitarian aid with such precision to civilian populations under the shadow of an ongoing conflict. Villages from the Rhine to the Weser were chosen for the drops, their coordinates carefully verified by Allied reconnaissance teams. Pilots navigated snow-covered fields, frozen rivers, and partially destroyed towns, descending to altitudes that allowed for accurate placement of supplies while minimizing exposure to remaining German anti-aircraft defenses. Over Hamelin, Celle, and smaller hamlets dotting Lower Saxony, the sky filled with parachutes, blooming like pale flowers against the gray winter clouds. On the ground, the response was overwhelming. Women, children, and the elderly gathered in open courtyards, frozen fields, and village squares. Mothers clutched their children as bundles floated down, their eyes wide with disbelief. For weeks, the sound of silence, the quiet march of hunger, had dominated these spaces. Now, the soft thuds of food hitting snow and the laughter of children retrieving it broke the oppressive weight. German women wept openly, tears mingling with soot and frost, while others knelt in the snow to secure parcels for families and neighbors. The smallest act of sharing became a lifeline. Women divided bread among children, poured milk into communal pots, and distributed chocolate to calm shivering infants. The emotional intensity was captured in letters, diaries, and Red Cross reports. One nurse recorded that villagers fell to their knees, sobbing, as if heaven itself had opened the skies to them. Another observer noted that women moved tirelessly through the snow, ensuring that elderly neighbors and sick children received portions first. These moments illustrated the human heartbeat of the operation. Relief not just in calories, but in hope, dignity, and recognition that life could continue even amid destruction. Simultaneously, the scale of the operation revealed the logistical brilliance behind it. Flights were synchronized from multiple airfields in England and southern Germany, with crews coordinating via radio to ensure continuous coverage. Each sortie delivered hundreds of packages, each parachute rigged to land safely on uneven terrain. Engineers had anticipated snow-laden fields and designed packaging to prevent spoilage or breakage, ensuring that food arrived edible and intact. Leadership at the highest levels monitored the operation, analyzing reports in near real time to adjust drop zones and schedules for maximum efficiency. Even German authorities, once reluctant, had little choice but to comply. Soldiers stationed in villages observed women distributing food, children laughing, and neighbors embracing in relief. The stark contrast between civilians suffering before the drops and the scene now unfolding was undeniable. Diaries reveal that some officials felt conflicted, witnessing their citizens' gratitude directed toward the enemy they had been trained to fear. Yet, they could not intervene without violating agreements with the Red Cross or inviting international scrutiny. The cumulative effect of the expanded operation was profound. Hunger, while not immediately eradicated, was mitigated. Starvation-related deaths dropped, and for the first time in months, families could rely on a measurable source of sustenance. For women, who bore the responsibility of household survival, the impact was both practical and psychological. They moved with purpose, coordinating distributions, reassuring children, and managing what little remained in home stores. Their resilience, coupled with the tangible aid from the air, created a visible shift in morale across villages. As the days passed, the operation became a rhythm. Planes overhead, bundles descending, women collecting and distributing, children laughing amid the snow. Photographs taken by Allied observers captured the juxtaposition of destruction and hope. Ruined streets, lined with broken buildings, yet filled with villagers clinging to packages of flour and canned meat. One image shows a mother kneeling in a snow-covered courtyard, arms outstretched toward a descending parachute, face wet with tears, while her child watches wide-eyed. Such images would later become iconic representations of the civilian experience in late-war Germany. The expanded relief operation also sent a clear message to both German authorities and the world. Even in the midst of total war, humanitarian action was possible. The combination of meticulous planning, technological adaptation, and human determination transformed the act of dropping food from a logistical mission into a profoundly emotional event. Women wept not only from hunger eased, but from the emotional weight of years of suffering, fear, and uncertainty being temporarily lifted. As this operation reached its peak, it became more than a delivery of calories. It was a demonstration of human compassion, operational excellence, and the tangible power of relief to transform despair into hope. The skies that had once been feared as harbingers of destruction were now symbols of salvation, descending over villages where German women, children, and the elderly witnessed, for the first time in months, the mercy of the outside world. The success of these expanded drops set the stage for the aftermath. The longer-term consequences of relief for civilian survival, morale, and the broader perception of the Allies' role in the closing months of the war. In the days following the first wave of food drops, the impact on German civilian life was immediate and profound. Villages that had been shrouded in hunger and despair began to show signs of recovery. Mothers and grandmothers, who had spent months rationing meager scraps, could finally prepare nourishing meals for children and the elderly. For the first time in weeks, bread, sugar, and powdered milk filled kitchen shelves, offering not only sustenance, but a sense of hope. Reports from the Red Cross and local observers document the tangible effects on health. Children, previously gaunt and lethargic, began regaining strength. Mothers, long exhausted from the daily struggle to feed their families, found temporary relief. Clinics reported a slight but significant reduction in cases of malnutrition-related illnesses. Women organized distribution networks within their communities, ensuring that no household went entirely without. These small, coordinated acts of care underscored both the resilience of the civilian population and the critical role women played in mitigating the effects of prolonged starvation. Emotionally, the drops carried equal weight. Diaries, letters, and testimonies from the period emphasized the intensity of reactions. Women wept openly in village squares, clutching parcels to their chests, while children ran through snow-covered streets, laughing for the first time in months. Some families held communal meals, breaking bread together and sharing chocolate or milk, creating fleeting moments of normalcy amid the chaos of war. The operation offered a psychological reprieve as much as a physical one, restoring a fragile sense of dignity and humanity. The German authorities, meanwhile, struggled to process the situation. Local administrators noted that while the operation fulfilled a humanitarian purpose, it also undermined Nazi control over civilian populations. Civilians openly expressed gratitude toward the Allies, a sentiment that conflicted with propaganda directives and challenged the narrative of continued resistance. Soldiers stationed nearby observed the transformation in morale, noting that women and children now navigated ruined streets with renewed purpose, distributing food and caring for neighbors. From a logistical perspective, the immediate consequences reinforced the success of meticulous planning. Flights continued daily, and the coordination between Allied air crews and relief organizations proved reliable even in adverse weather conditions. Pilots reported increased confidence in low-altitude drops, navigating snowstorms and frozen fields to deliver supplies with remarkable precision. The Red Cross documented thousands of parcels reaching intended recipients, with minimal losses or spoilage, marking the operation as both a humanitarian and operational triumph. The first few days of relief demonstrated that even in the darkest months of winter, carefully executed interventions could alleviate suffering on a large scale. For women in particular, the drops symbolized the tangible arrival of hope, the knowledge that their children would eat, that the elderly could survive, and that the war, though relentless, had not extinguished the possibility of compassion. This immediate relief set the stage for a broader understanding of the operation's significance. The psychological uplift, combined with the physical sustenance provided, transformed civilian experience across Germany. The successes of the initial drops would inform subsequent flights and larger-scale missions, ultimately shaping Allied strategies for humanitarian intervention and civilian care in the closing months of the war. The immediate consequences of the operation naturally lead to its broader strategic and historical effects, influencing political perceptions, military planning, and post-war interpretations. Beyond the immediate relief to starving civilians, the Allied food drops carried broader strategic and historical significance. Politically, the operation demonstrated the Allies' ability to combine military power with humanitarian purpose. While Allied bombers had previously symbolized destruction, the delivery of sustenance showcased a different facet of strategic influence, one that could win hearts as effectively as territory. The operation sent a clear message to German civilians, German authorities, and the wider world. The Allies were capable not only of defeating the Axis militarily, but also of exercising moral authority in the treatment of noncombatants. The operation also influenced German perceptions and internal calculations. Reports from local administrators noted a subtle shift in civilian attitudes. Mothers and families, who had long endured the hardships imposed by the regime, began to view the Allies in a more favorable light. Letters and diaries described children's laughter echoing through villages, mothers sharing food with neighbors, and communities organizing to distribute supplies equitably. Nazi propaganda, which had long emphasized loyalty and sacrifice, faced a quiet but undeniable erosion of credibility. These small shifts in morale, particularly among women, the keepers of households and family survival, hinted at the growing inevitability of defeat. From a military perspective, the operation offered valuable lessons in coordination and logistics. Pilots, engineers, and planners had perfected low-altitude precision drops, navigation over contested or damaged territory, and the safe delivery of fragile cargo in adverse winter conditions. These methods informed not only future humanitarian missions, but also operational planning in complex environments, demonstrating that air power could achieve objectives beyond destruction alone. The cooperation between multiple Allied forces, relief organizations, and local authorities illustrated the potential for combining civil and military expertise in large-scale operations. Historically, the food drops became a symbol of civilian resilience and the intersection of warfare with humanitarian concern. Newspapers, Red Cross reports, and post-war memoirs documented the emotion-laden scenes. Women weeping in village squares, children clutching sacks of flour, and families sharing chocolate in the snow. These accounts preserve the memory of both suffering and salvation, providing later generations with insight into the lived experience of civilians during the final months of the European war. Photographs and written testimonies became central to understanding the human dimension of conflict, emphasizing that the consequences of war extend far beyond the battlefield. The operation also laid the groundwork for post-war relief strategies. Lessons learned in coordinating international aid in a conflict zone informed reconstruction efforts across Europe, shaping approaches to civilian care, food distribution, and the role of neutral organizations like the Red Cross. The visibility of women and families in these operations reinforced the understanding that civilians were active participants in the survival of communities, not merely passive recipients of aid. By bridging military capability with humanitarian intent, the food drops left a lasting legacy. German women, in particular, experienced the operation not as a distant military maneuver, but as a deeply personal intervention. Their tears, laughter, and expressions of gratitude would be remembered as emblematic of the war's civilian experience, a reminder that even amid devastation, human compassion could assert itself from the skies. The cumulative effect of these drops was both tactical and moral. Immediate survival was secured for thousands of civilians, and the operation offered a stark contrast between the cruelty of ongoing conflict and the possibility of humane action. The experiences of German women, mothers, and families framed the historical memory of these months, emphasizing the enduring significance of humanitarian efforts in wartime. The broader consequences, both strategic and emotional, naturally lead into a final reflection on what the operation meant for humanity, warfare, and history. The food drops over starving German villages in January 1945 stand as one of the most poignant examples of humanitarian intervention during wartime. They remind us that even amid total war, when destruction dominates the skies and survival becomes a daily struggle, acts of compassion can profoundly shape human experience. For the women who had carried the weight of hunger and despair in their homes, the parachuted bundles were more than sustenance. They were tangible proof that hope could survive in the midst of devastation. Their tears, caught in the cold winter air, spoke to both the relief of immediate survival and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Strategically, the operation demonstrated a new dimension of military capability. Allied forces showed that air power could be deployed not only to destroy, but to preserve, to sustain life as effectively as it could dismantle cities. Technological adaptation, careful planning, and international coordination allowed thousands of civilians to live through a winter that might otherwise have claimed countless lives. Leadership decisions, from the highest command in Washington and London to pilots navigating snow-covered fields, were measured not merely in tactical outcomes, but in moral impact. Historically, the operation left an indelible mark on the memory of World War II. It highlighted the critical role of women and mothers as both the emotional and practical anchors of civilian communities. Their experiences, recorded in diaries, photographs, and oral histories, offer a human lens through which we understand the cost of war and the value of mercy. In these moments, humanity itself became the operational objective. The food drops also serve as a reminder that war is never solely about soldiers, strategies, or territories. It is about the people who live through it, those whose bodies, families, and communities bear the brunt of suffering. In the quiet villages of Germany, where women wept in snow-laden courtyards, the Allied operation transcended logistics and strategy. It became a symbol of hope, dignity, and the enduring possibility of compassion. Ultimately, the story of these drops endures not only in historical records, but in the collective imagination. A winter when the skies, once feared as instruments of death, delivered life, and when the resilience of women illuminated the profound intersection of survival, empathy, and history.